have been asked by students to do a game on the Tarrasch. And the Tarrasch is not trash. It's actually one of the better options to play against the French, especially if you're a positional player, favored by e4 players like Karpov in his match with Korchnoi. So let's get into this game. And the Tarrasch variation is characterized by this knight d2. And the classical way of playing with knight f6, players like Akobian make it work, but it is not my top choice. I added it to Master the French Defense because readers kept requesting it. And I added other options between Master the French Defense and 1e6 against everything. I've got the Rubinstein with knight d7, as well as the Fort Knox with bishop d7 followed by bishop c6. I've got knight f6 recommended, and this is my main recommendation in both Master of the French Defense as well as 1e6 versus everything, c5, followed by queen, not pawn takes. Pawn takes is a reasonable variation, but on a personal level, I think it's harder to play isolated pawn positions, so I prefer queen takes. And after knight gf3, there's been a recent book, it's like Crush the French with the Tarrasch. Yeah, it's just not happening, I'll put it that way. This line, you can already turn on the engine, it's a shoulder shrug. So c takes d4, and multiple queen moves are playable. Queen d6, queen d8, and after analyzing these positions, I really liked queen d7 as the most flexible of the three moves, as we're eyeing more squares, and our intent is to put the bishop on b7 in the long run. Also, the ability to play bishop c5 is one of the keys to queen d7, as well as overprotection of e6 and f7, as both queen d8 and queen d6 have some lines where that pressure can give us some issues. Castles, so knight c6, and we're going to get white to focus on this pawn that we've grabbed, and in the meantime, basic development. Very important move, a6, multi-purpose. 1, prevent losing your queen from bishop b5, and 2, you're looking at playing b5 yourself. Now after rook e1, this is one of those keys to the position, bishop c5. After rook e1 in the other lines, moves like knight f5 can be quite annoying, especially if your queen's in another spot. But here, after c3, we have an opportunity to create an imbalance from a very solid position, and we should elect to do so. You go, well, you're giving up your good bishop. You told me not to do that. And you're giving up the bishop pair. I've been told so many times not to do that. Okay? So now let's learn about actual chess, because there's exceptions. And in this case, if you're playing for a win, you need to create an imbalance and make the imbalance that you have better than what your opponent does. In this case, my 2350 rated opponent says, I'm going to trade queens, and this is a dry position. It's the bishops on an open board. But there is an isolated pawn, and generally speaking, if I can trade my French bishop, my light square bishop, for its counterpart, I'm going to be happy in the knight versus dark square bishop endgame, especially with this pawn being where it's at. So I need to act quickly. b5, bishop b7. This ensures that this pawn is not going to get traded. If it was, white would unquestionably have an advantage. But in this case, I'm not worried. Bishop f4 is played. Well, let's attack the weakness, rook d8, bishop b5, and I encourage you to go ahead and take. I'm not worried. If you were to take, I'm simply going to go rook d7 and rook fd8, and you're going to have a hard time defending this pawn, if I can't just take it immediately. Rook ac1 is played. White is trying to invade. He wants the c7 square. So I say no. You go rook c7, Okay. Now, what was our objective we talked about earlier? Favorable imbalance. Take the opportunity to play bishop d5. Many would play rook c8, but the bishop on c7 is not a good piece right now. So let's leave it there for a moment. And after bishop d5, we have bishop d6. Now I'll go rook c8. That's the only open file on the board. Again, I don't need to bother the bishop to improve it to go to a square to say e5 to attack my knight. Bishop c5. Double pawns. And an isolated pawn on d4. Let's start improving the position and make the knight even stronger. Knight d7. Gotta love it when you see it. More pawns on the same color as your bishop, taking away squares from the bishop, making it weaker, and making my knight stronger in the meantime. So I need to start getting more pawns on light squares, see if I can't fix more weaknesses. Make sure I'm not going to get back rank mated. So start with h5. Rook a1. But you're hitting the a pawn, so let's defend the a pawn in the most flexible way. Not rook a8, but rook c6. After f3, knight f6. Just looking for a better square for the knight, more flexible, keeping an eye on a number of key squares and that access point for the king. g3. Now our king can start to gradually work his way into the game. And let's gain a little bit more space. Since the position is locked, that favors the knight, right? Just checking, just making sure. Slow, steady improvements here. Rook e1, back to that theme. Pawns on the opposite color of the bishop. f5, and after rook e2, g4. Notice, all my pawns on light squares, the bishop is becoming more and more meaningless with gradual, steady improvement here of the pawn structure. Pawn takes. Let's keep it in one piece. And after h4, now come on back, knight f6, knight e4, and the rook is doing such a fantastic job covering, and I'm also threatening knight f2, so rook h7, and probably knight f2 just gets the job done. And that's the end of this one. So hopefully you enjoyed this game, and this is a game in general that it's so easy to just trade pieces in chess and make a draw. But when you're trading with an intent in mind, in this case, creating an imbalance to eventually win the game, this shows that transition of how to make a knight dominate a bishop when there's lots of pawns still on the board. So hopefully it was instructive for you, even if you don't play the French. And if you'd like to see more annotated games like this, check out Master the French Defense, as well as 1e6 Against Everything, only on Chessable. Thanks again for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe if you liked it. Thanks.